James, for sharing that reading with us. Will you join with me in prayer? May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words you hear be captured by your soul and enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. As James said in the introduction of the scripture reading this morning, the first verses of the book of the prophet Jeremiah establish the age in which he made his prophecies. And it was a very volatile age indeed. It started out with a strong national revival instituted by King Josiah. That revival was made possible by the end of a century-long control by Assyria. And there was a great optimism and hope for the future now that the Assyrian control was gone and they were in control of their own lives. Great optimism and hope, and a renewed determination to be loyal to Yahweh, their God. But that optimism slowly slipped into complacency. And that religious fervor morphed into an irrational belief that God could be relied upon to guard and protect Judah no matter how the people conducted their affairs. That whatever they did, God was going to protect them. Much of the prophecies of Jeremiah were warnings of where their complacency and their religious blindness would lead them. But the people did not listen to him or to any of the other prophets of the age. And Jeremiah lived to see the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians and the forced exile of about half of its inhabitants to Babylon. The first verses of Jeremiah then go on to describe how he received his call to be a prophet. Jeremiah says that God spoke to him, saying that before he was formed in the womb, God had chosen him to be a prophet. And when he first resisted the call to prophecy, he was assured that God would give him the words to say. That's how Jeremiah describes his call to be a prophet. But when I hear or read something like that, I always go to a place where I wonder what was going on in Jeremiah's mind through all of this. What thoughts and experiences brought him to the place where he was open to a conversation with God? Because my experience and my observation is that conversations with God, such as Jeremiah describes, just don't come unannounced out of the blue. They're usually precipitated by some inner crisis or struggle. So what were Jeremiah's inner struggles that opened him to hear God's call? Of course, there's no sure way to get inside Jeremiah's head because he didn't write about what he was thinking and feeling before he was called to prophecy. But I think we can get some kinds of hints when we look at what he prophesied about. What were the issues that compelled Jeremiah to speak his prophetic words? And when we read the book of Jeremiah, I think we see that Jeremiah was upset by the complacency of the people. Why couldn't they see what was happening to them? Surely there were others who could see what he was seeing, that the nation was in great danger, and the people didn't even seem to care. No one seemed to be saying or doing anything about it. Why wasn't someone standing up and saying something or doing something? Was the nation going to collapse because no one would speak out? And then it began to dawn on him that if he was the only one he knew who seemed to be troubled by the complacency around him, then if anybody was going to speak out, it had to be him. I also think that Jeremiah was troubled by the attitudes of the people towards God. How could they expect that God was going to protect them from harm when they ignored God the rest of the time? If they were faithful in their relationship to God in all of their living, then perhaps that relationship would make clear to them the path that they were supposed to go on. But they were blind to their relationship with God, so they couldn't see the path clearly. The religious leaders ought to be leading the people, calling them back to faithfulness. Somebody ought to say something. And then it began to be clear to Jeremiah that if someone was going to say something about the unfaithfulness of the people, then that someone had to be him. Of course, I said earlier this is all speculation because Jeremiah didn't write those feelings. But even if it is speculation and doesn't describe what Jeremiah was thinking and feeling, I still think it might be useful because I think it describes us often. How we so often respond to situations of crisis and struggle such as Jeremiah experienced. Someone ought to do something. Someone ought to say something. Who's going to do something? And then it begins to dawn on us that maybe if I'm the one who's feeling this and thinking this, then I'm the one who has to speak or act. This passage was speaking to me poignantly this week and in the past couple of weeks because, like many of you, I've been following the high school protests around the shooting in Florida. I'm sure that few, if any, of those students at Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, would have been lobbying for gun control if the shooting there hadn't taken the lives of 17 of their friends and fellow students and teachers. But no one they talked to, including the President of the United States, seemed to be interested in doing anything about it, anything meaningful about it. Someone ought to be saying or doing something. Who's going to say something? And it soon dawned on them that the someone was them. And they acted, and they spoke. Who would have thought just a month ago that hundreds of high school and middle school students would have gathered outside the White House this past Tuesday chanting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, the NRA has got to go." I mean, that was a major seismic change. Will they be successful in their objectives? That's difficult to say. There are so many in the states who are pushing hard to ensure their failure. I read an article just the other day that says that Fox News is focusing all of their reporting on discrediting the students and what they stand for. The students will need a large or larger number of U.S. citizens who can be counted on to support them. And to make that support known, needs to be a groundswell of support if change is going to happen. And all of this brings me back to the prophecies of Jeremiah, who railed against the complacency of his day. He was stunned because most of the people didn't seem aware of what was going on around them. Events that were so obvious to him. Or else they did see what was going on, but were too complacent to act or to speak. Or perhaps they did see, but felt themselves powerless to act, and looked around to see who was going to speak for them, to say something. Or perhaps they felt that they were Yahweh's people, and God simply wouldn't let anything terrible happen to them. if Jeremiah were living in our time and place, would he be observing the same complacency? I think he would. But I think he would also see signs of us coming out of that complacency. I might have shared with you a report that I read about a foundation, an American foundation, whose job is to encourage and enable women who want to become part of the political process in the United States, and who are looking for ways that they can become involved, perhaps as a candidate in an election, or perhaps as a support for a candidate for an election. Women who want to somehow become involved in the political process. And the article I read said that in 2016, the foundation received about 900 phone inquiries from women who wanted to become involved in the political process. In 2017, after Donald Trump was elected president, the number of inquiries went from 900 to over 16,000. Things are changing. Let's face it, few of us, perhaps none of us, are going to stand up and speak or act like the students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. But there aren't just two alternatives. Either be complacent or get involved the way they were. As we become knowledgeable and ready to add our voice or our actions to those who lead the way, then I think the impetus for change grows. As I was thinking about this past week, there was an old Pete Seeger song that came to mind that we used to sing in young people's days. And that was when I was about 12 years old. No, it wasn't. I don't think I've ever heard it sung since back then. And I don't think we sang it with much fervor and hope that it was going to become a reality. But I've been thinking about the voice of those high school students who've been trying to change the world. And I've really begun to feel the power in Seeger's words. And a couple of the verses in his song go kind of like this. One man's eyes can't see the future clear. Two men's eyes can't see the future clear. But if 2 and 2 and 50 make a million, we'll see that day come round. We'll see that day come round. One man's voice can't shout to make them hear. Two men's voices can't shout to make them hear. But if 2 and 2 and 50 make a million, we'll see that day come round. We'll see that day come round. And I believe we are seeing that day come round. It isn't inevitable. In Jeremiah's time, the reforms of King Josiah, people felt that things were going to change. And it didn't, because people sank back into complacency. But we don't have to be complacent. We don't have to act like those students. I was also reminded, no, I wasn't. I was looking through a bunch of books the other day, some of my old books, and I found a book that I'd used to lead a study in the early 1980s. And I'd forgotten I'd ever used the study, but it was a great book, and I remembered some of the things that it said. It's called Living Towards a Vision by Walter Brueggemann. And he was talking about our vision for the future, the vision that comes out of our faith, a vision of a world of compassion, a world of justice, a world of hope. And he says that if we do have that vision, then our beliefs and our knowledge and our actions and our words must all be focused towards that vision. And we can't allow ourselves to be distracted by others in the world who have other visions that say that's not possible and it's not going to happen. Everything we do has to be focused towards that vision. And I think that's starting to happen. And I believe it can change the world. As I said, I believe that the day we sing about is closer now than it was in the 1980s even. There is more compassion, despite all of the terrible things in the world, and I don't want to make light of those, but there's also a force for change that's happening. And if our vision and our words and our actions live towards that vision, then we will see that day come round. I believe that Jeremiah would take heart in our day. Let's have a few moments with our own thoughts.